This podcast may contain explicit language. Once you've met someone, you never really forget them. Spirited Away is next. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
Tonight, for our 321st episode, we discuss Spirited Away from 2001, celebrating its 25th anniversary. Written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki. I'm going to butcher these names, so start your laughing now. But cinematography by Atsushi Akuye. Oh, no, that was not right. Okui? Let's go with that. Music by Joe Hisaishi. Editing by Takeshi Sayama. With characters such as Chihiro Ogino, or Sen, Haku, Spirit of the Kohaku River, Yubaba, Zeniba, Lin, Kamaji, Bo, the baby, Aniyaku, Akio Ogino, Yuko Ogino, No Face, Agieru, Chichiaku, Bandai Geru, or the foreman, and the River Spirit. Now, the reason that I don't say who the voiceovers or characters are is because a lot of people have experienced this movie in one of two ways, which is the Japanese voiceovers with the titles or the subtitles, or the Americanized version with all of the American voiceovers. Yes. So it'd be kind of unusual to try and read both because it's been experienced in those different ways. So I'm going to make this one weird exception here for this film tonight. But background for the movie, Spirited Away was released on July 20th, 2001. Again, making that the 25th anniversary on the date that this roughly will come out. On a budget of $19.2 million, Spirited Away grossed roughly $274 million to finish number 15 at the worldwide box office for 2001. It was widely critically praised and won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature in 2002. Susan Napier, professor of Japanese studies at Tufts University, called Spirited Away's wins at major Western award shows, quote, a very big shot in the arm to the Japanese animation industry. She further explained that cartoons in the West have often been seen as childish, vulgar things that you didn't take seriously. But after the film took home the Academy Award, people were starting to see animation as a real art form. Spirited Away has since been considered one of the greatest animated features of all time. In 2004, Cinefantastique listed the film as one of the 10 essential animations. In 2005, Spirited Away was ranked by IGN as the 12th best animated film of all time. The film is also the 9th highest rated film of all time on Metacritic, being the highest rated traditionally animated film on the site. The film ranked 10th in Empire Magazine's The 100 Best Films of World Cinema in 2010. Also in 2010, Rotten Tomatoes ranked it as the 13th best animated film on the site, and in 2012 as the 17th. In 2019, it topped the site's list of 140 essential animated films. The film was ranked at number 46 on Time Out Magazine's list of the 100 best movies of all time. The film is listed within the top 10 on the British Film Institute's list of top 50 films for children up to the age of 14. In 2016, it was voted the 4th best film of the 21st century by the BBC, making it the highest-ranking animated film on that list. In 2017, the New York Times ranked it as the 2nd best film of the 21st century so far. In 2021, the Writers Guild of America ranked Spirited Away's screenplay the 67th greatest of the 21st century so far. In 2022, the film was ranked number 75 on Sight and Sound's greatest films list, being one of 2 animated films to make the list, alongside Miyazaki's own My Neighbor Totoro. In 2025, the film ranked number 9 on the New York Times' list of the 100 best movies of the 21st century. In July 2025, it ranked 15th on Rolling Stone's list of the 100 best movies of the 21st century. Spirited Away currently holds a 96% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 96 score on Metacritic, and a 4.4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. But we can't do this by ourselves, so we bring in our newest celebrity guest. He is the host and creator of Screen Nerds, the podcast, a CLP contributor making his first appearance on the show. Please welcome in Michael Burgett.
A round of applause, too. That's pretty impressive. pretty impressive.
So, welcome in. How are you?
I'm good. I am happy to be here, happy to join in on the conversation, especially for a Miyazaki film, a Studio Ghibli film. That's one of my favorites to talk about, so happy to be here with y'all.
So, I would venture to say this is not your first time with the film, then?
No, it's not. We'll get into more later on about my whole thing with this film and Studio Ghibli in general. But no, this is not the first time. It's not even the second time that I've seen the film.
My relationship with the film, and this is something we normally start with, this is only the second time I've seen it. I had a friend about 2 or 3 years ago that found out I had not seen any Miyazaki movies, and felt that this was the one he needed to start me on. So some random Saturday, I went over to his house and we watched this. Now, to be fair, I am not inundated with anime. It is not a hobby or a pastime of mine like some people of my generation, which I know it is part of the cultural lexicon at this point. It is very between manga and anime and some of these other Eastern influences, particularly from the animated sphere. There are people of my generation that very much appreciate it and they treat it almost in the same way that I did with comic books or superheroes when I was growing up. So I understand the fervor, but this was not something that was part of my education as a kid. I think the closest that I really ever got to any of this was I think I watched Dragon Ball Z for a couple of years while my friends were watching it when I was in middle school. But outside of that, I was not familiar with this movie or Miyazaki at all. I really hadn't watched anything. So the concept and the plotting and the kind of abstract nature of the film that feels like it's kind of back and forth. You can't really figure out, at least from the first time through, what exactly is all happening. I have to admit that I didn't care for the film that much. And only by watching a few of his other ones did I start to appreciate kind of his sense of the world. It makes sense, and I was going to get to it later. He doesn't write out a planned, plotted script for most of these. He starts with storyboards and bigger ideas, and then starts to weave in a story in between all of these things. And I think me being admittedly on this show, someone who's always focused on character, plot, story, the abstract nature of how he approaches these concepts, and it's more about the visual, it's more about the art, it's the animation that's more important, I don't think came through as well for me. That being said, this second time through, I have to say I appreciated it a lot more. It's still not my favorite. I personally liked Howl's Moving Castle a lot more. But outside of that, I did have a better understanding of the film. Dad, I know this is your first time with the film. I can't say that I've gotten you to watch a ton of animation over the years, let alone anime. The one anime film that we've really attempted to try so far during the course of the show over the last 6 years has been Your Name, which we both very much enjoyed. Yes. But that's much more of a straightforward, a very plotted story. I told you going into this that I thought you'd have a hard time because it's much more abstract, which you admittedly have said is difficult for you to understand. So let me just start. Did you like the film?
You know, it's been 4 days since I saw it, and I still have yet to determine whether I do or I don't. Let's say that I appreciate it because I can see how well it's done and what he was trying to accomplish. I'm just having a hard time understanding certain aspects of it, of where he was trying to go with it and what he was trying to say about it. And I'll get into more of that kind of later. But the first thing, for example, that struck me is that all the characters, and was there a separate set of drawings for this, for the United States versus Japan, because all of the characters looked Caucasian to me.
I don't believe so. In fact, when they did the dubbing, I'm pretty sure that, what was it, John Lasseter tried to match up the voiceovers to the original lip movements so that they would sync up pretty well.
So, I thought it was okay. Would I watch it again? Probably. I'm going to tell you that my rankings and how I evaluated this on the score is going to show that I have an appreciation for the movie. It's just, I'm just not sure I like it. It struck me as just kind of odd, and that it didn't make some semblance of sense to me.
I understand where you're coming from. That is very similar to my first viewing of the film. That I felt that the narrative wasn't quite as clear. It didn't make as much sense. I think by the end, I understood more where it was going. And so you start to see some of these other themes. But we can kind of dive into that here in a second. Michael, what's your relationship with the film, though?
So for this film, I got to it the first time around the mid-2000s. So I didn't see it initially when it came out in theaters. I was still kind of playing catch up with Miyazaki. My first Miyazaki film was Princess Mononoke, which I still have a love for that film and gush about it all the time. But I was playing catch up with it, so I caught this film, Spirited Away, probably about 2004, 2005 on DVD watching it. And yeah, I didn't really get into it as much the first time around seeing it. Like, I understood it, like, because I had appreciation at that point for Miyazaki and his films. But I had other films of his that I enjoyed more. But as time has gone on, and especially when I got to see it in the theater for one of the Ghibli Fests a couple years ago, that's when I really started to understand and appreciate this film a little bit more. And then rewatching it a couple of days ago, the same thing. I still don't have it higher than other Miyazaki films, just because there are other Miyazaki films that I just have a heart for and love and appreciation for. But I understand why this film is as celebrated as it is, and why it's an entry point for a lot of people, especially of the generation of like the 2000s that kind of got into anime. Like, this was their first one. I personally wouldn't recommend people see this one if they're being introduced to Ghibli or Miyazaki. There's several other ones I would recommend, but I get why this one is the way it is, and it's loved and appreciated.
I thought this was a good entry point for the show, just given how celebrated that this movie is. But I would agree with you that I think there are some other ones that I think are a little bit clearer, a little bit easier to understand as a plot line, per se, to start somebody on, especially if they're not used to the world and the type of storytelling that Miyazaki does.
Yeah, like I've said several times on my podcast that if you have like young kids, I would say Ponyo or My Neighbor Totoro is a better entry point. If you're a teenager or an adult, I would say like Nausicaa or Princess Mononoke or Howl's Moving Castle are better entry points, because the stories are a little bit more able to understand and they're a little bit more compelling. Spirited Away has a interesting story to it, but again, it's a little bit more intangible to it. Like, you can't really get a hold of it as easily as you can of some of his other ones, but it has a special place, I think, and we'll get into it more like when we really dive into it, about I think why it has the place that it has with a lot of people as like one of the best films.
So why does this then stand out? If this isn't the most clear film, if it's not even necessarily everybody's favorite of Miyazaki's, why is this the one that stands out, though, that seems to be either the most resonant or the most celebrated of his films? Dad, you probably can't answer that question.
Yeah, not really, but I mean, just from what I've gathered, one of the comments I've seen is that this has a tendency to speak to younger women who are in the process of, developing themselves and trying to find their identity. And so it speaks to them.
That's interesting.
I think it really is time and place. I think the time and place in which this film came out, it released in Japan in 2001, then kind of rolled into North America late 01, early 02. And around this time period, that was when kind of Japan and anime was really kind of hitting its stride. Like in the 90s, you had, Sailor Moon, you had Dragon Ball Z, you had, Miyazaki films were starting to come over a little bit more, but really it was the Disney partnership. Like they got the distribution rights to North America at the end of the 90s, and this was the first film where they really had the promotion of it and saying, here's Miyazaki, here's Studio Ghibli, and having that kind of as the engine to drive it, along with the idea of like really Toonami and anime really kind of taking hold in North America. I think it just kind of all came together at the right time to have this film be really readily available, and so like people could like see the work that Miyazaki has done, because Miyazaki up to this point had done some great work, had done some celebrated work, but really it was at this point, like with having Disney behind it, I think really kind of pushed it even further to where we got the accolades that it ended up getting.
Certainly. I just wonder, to a degree, and this is where I kind of left the first viewing of it for me, the overlap that seemingly happens in this movie consistent with The Wizard of Oz, and I wonder how many people are attached to this movie or approach it similarly as a very abstract, allegory-heavy story that is fantastical characters and has this journey, has a young girl trying to find herself, but all of it seemingly to me is about her growing up simultaneous to her parents being taken away from her, and that she has to find her own way in the world for once. Yes, with a lot of assistance, but she has to stand up for herself. And so I guess that speaks a little bit to what Dad was mentioning before of the quotes of this, that it feels empowering for younger women to see that in a character like this that is placed in a completely foreign world that you would think would overmatch her, and she ends up doing okay. In fact, probably excelling.
Well, that's one of the hallmarks of Studio Ghibli films, is the fact that there are really well-written young female characters. I mean, we see that all the way back to Nausicaa and the way that character was written. She's a very strong, independent, really well-written character, and that's kind of like the kicking off point. And then you go all the way to My Neighbor Totoro with the twins, or the two girls. You have Kiki's Delivery Service, you have Whisper of the Heart, you have Princess Mononoke. Like there is a track record for having that type of character, and Spirited Away is just another example of that. And I think that also speaks to what Miyazaki likes to have in his films. He doesn't like to have just characters that aren't developed and well written. Like, he makes sure that there is that in there. And also too, one of the trademarks is flying. Like we see that in this film as well. Like, he has this this idea of like showcasing flying, and especially with the animation, like you see and you get kind of caught up in that, of how beautiful the idea of flying is, and how it just kind of, it takes you away from, you know, the ground and being kind of tied down to things. It kind of just lifts you up. And I think that's one thing too about this film, is it has that kind of just lifts you up and brings you up to where you know, where it wants you to be in the story.
Dad, now having seeing Your Name before as your primary examples, how do you think that this compares to most of the Western animation that I know you're much more familiar with? your Pixars, your DreamWorks, your Disneys.
This is trying to say a little bit more than what most Western films are, or animated films. And one of the things, and I'm going to get to this when we ask about what the film's about, and I guess maybe now is just the time is bring it up. Part of this is not just the female character, but it's the sense that children sometimes end up becoming the care or the leaders within the family. And I connected myself to that because of my parents' situation and how much responsibility I ended up having as a teenager with them. And so, without it being too flippant, I mean, this is basically Hillbilly Elegy without J.D. Vance set in Japan, where he has to take over responsibility to monitor and care for his mother and his family. And I think that's what this is. She's had to take responsibility. Her parents, whether you want to say it completely or not, were not very responsible in deciding to go into the area and eating food and all. You know, they kind of brought this all on themselves, and she had to take responsibility for saving them as well as herself, which is something that a child or a young girl or any young child should not have to be able to do or be required to do. So that, to me, expresses more than anything what this film is about, is that feeling. And you can point to a lot of people. You can point to the fact of some of the interviews I've heard Stephen Colbert given that his father and two older brothers were killed in a plane crash, and the responsibilities he ended up taking on as one of the remaining sons, if not the only remaining son, if I think about it. No, I guess there is one other one. That's where I think this film really lies, is understanding how sometimes circumstances thrust things upon people that they were not necessarily expecting, and sometimes that is what causes them to achieve more and rise higher than their normal circumstances would be.
So we're skipping ahead apparently in the questions here, because that's more about what the film is about as opposed to anything comparatively. I would say that if I'm building a history just for myself and looking at these, and I'm obviously more familiar with a lot of the Disney movies as you grow up as a kid, especially when I was a kid, I watched Peter Pan. I think that's fairly obvious to anybody who has listened to the history of the show, that's been brought up multiple times, how often I used to watch that. But The Rescuers, Robin Hood, a lot of these Disney animated classics from yesteryear, and a lot of them seem to have certain tropes, that there are friendly animals that are a part of it, or there is somewhat simple animation as part of it. The stories are very aimed at children, which I think is why it is seen as a lesser art form by most Western audiences, or at least was for a significant period of time. As these movies moved into the 80s and especially in the 90s, they became kind of sub-musicals because that seemed to attract children much more often. So Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, Mulan, Pocahontas, they all had these huge musical numbers that became like hit songs out of all of them. As we move more into Pixar, which at least was the reigning king in the United States and most of the Western world for that matter, for probably about 15 years, you can definitely see some of the influence of this. And when John Lasseter makes a quote that every time that they were looking for some level of inspiration, or that they were looking for more heart, more passion, something else, this particular film became kind of their... I'm not really sure how to put it, their callback.
Inspiration?
Yeah. So, as a result, I can see that the weighted themes of something like this are much more apparent, and especially some of the earlier Pixar films. Monsters, Inc. has a large amount of adult themes in it, even though it's aimed, or the target audience is children. The same with Finding Nemo, in my opinion. As we close out that decade and they're exploring even further concepts, Wall-E. I know it's made for children, but Wall-E is like way conceptually driven that feels much closer to a Spirited Away than it does a Shrek or a Peter Pan. And so I guess that's where I draw the line is that Pixar is somehow in between those two things, where it's got a very specific plot that it's easy to follow. It doesn't have the musical background, but it takes some of the parts of Western storytelling and then blends it with much more adult or headier themes.
Well, I think that because of Lasseter's relationship with Miyazaki, I think that kind of plays into how there is that influence. There was a time, I think it was like 2006, 2007, when Turner Classic Movies had a month of Miyazaki, and Lasseter was on there like doing interviews and introducing films of Studio Ghibli on there, and he would gush and talk about how much Miyazaki was an influence on him. And again, you see that in a lot of those Pixar films, especially the early ones, like you said. I mean, you even got in Toy Story 3, there's the cameo of the Totoro in the bedroom. So that's how much like there is that kind of blending in. And I think the influence, and especially I think you see it now in the last 10, 15 years or so, is how people have kind of grown up with Studio Ghibli. It's now kind of broadened out into more animation and how they treat storytelling as not just for little kids. It can be for everybody. And I think that's when you have the best animation storytelling is when it can hit those multiple quadrants, and that you're able to hit everybody at whatever different stage that they're at.
I don't think you get a film like Soul without having this type of filmmaking as an influence. Spirited Away has to be somewhat the distant cousin of something like Soul, because I just don't see that many Western films are made with that kind of emotionality at the heart of it, that really it's kind of a movie that's not made for kids, even though it's a Pixar Disney movie. So, Dad, do you have our plot summary ready for us?
I do. A young girl named Chihiro finds herself in a spirit world when her parents are turned into pigs after eating enchanted food. To save them, she takes a job at a bathhouse run by the witch Yubaba, while befriending the dragon boy Haku and the lonely spirit No Face along the way. Through courage and hard work, Chihiro grows into someone capable of breaking the curse and returning home.
Thank you, Dad. Now, I think both you and I have somewhat already answered the question, but what is the film about? Michael, let's go to you.
I think really at the heart of it, the plot of the film is a young girl who is moving to a new town, and she is unsure of herself, and through the course of this film finds assurance in who she is and finds out who she can become. And it takes this extraordinary experience to go through it in the spirit world, but really that's what it is. It's just a little bit of her growing up.
I would agree with that. I think that is a lot of what something like The Wizard of Oz is about, is this young girl being found in this unusual place and having to kind of make her way through it. Again, with a lot of help, but when you're young and you're struggling and you don't know what everything is going to do, you need help. I mean, that's the course of everybody's life. You don't make it through things by yourself. And so having these people that are looking out for you strategically at various spots, but also having these moments where you have to stand up on your own, I think are important to the overall growth. And I think it's why, especially people who watch it at a younger age, seem to have a bigger affection or attachment to the movie than I think me seeing it when I was in my 30s necessarily was going to have. Did you know Although it has a rich plot with well-developed characters, the film was not created with a script. Hayao Miyazaki's films have never used scripts during production. Quote, "I don't have the story finished and ready when we start to work on a film," the filmmaker told Midnight Eye. "I usually don't have the time, so the story develops as I begin drawing storyboards. The production starts while the storyboards are still evolving." Miyazaki doesn't know where the plot is heading, and he lets it develop naturally. Quote, "It's not me who makes the film makes itself, and I have no choice but to follow." That's one way of doing it.
Like, there's a great documentary of him. I think it's In the Kingdom of Madness, I believe is the name of it. And it actually shows, like, his work in how he develops a film. I think it was, when they were filming it, I think they were doing it with Ponyo, was the film that they were using as kind of the basis of showing how everything goes from, like, pre-production to the actual animation and stuff. And yeah, he really is a visual type of animator, and wanting to kind of lay everything out beforehand before he actually gets into animating, because a lot of his films are hand-drawn animation. So it's not, even in, you know, this time period when a lot of studios were moving to CGI, he was still very much of the, we draw it by hand and do it by hand. And so having those kind of storyboard layouts to kind of plot how the film is going to go, I think is a good way of showing, you know, where it was going, so that people can understand and see, for the animators, you know, this is the direction that we're going, this is how we're going to do it. And I think that's why a lot of his films still stand out and still hold up very well, because of that meticulous nature that he goes about in developing and making his films.
And because of that, I mean, I really don't wonder that hard why it seems like after each one of these, he wants to retire, and there are always these rumors that he's going to quit, or because I was not particularly surprised to see before this movie he apparently wanted to retire, and each subsequent movie that has come out, it's like he's retiring. Oh no, he's got one more film in him, and then he's retiring, and nope, we got one more. And so when The Boy and the Heron came out, and everybody was saying, "Oh, this will definitely be his last movie. He's like in his 80s now," and then immediately the film's released, he wins the Oscar again, and nope, I'm gonna make one more. I've got another idea. I think people that really have enjoyed his work are going to be glad anytime anything is released. I was not a personal fan of The Boy and the Heron. I thought it was even stranger than this film, especially the first time I saw it. But that being said, I have to imagine that to do this all by hand, and the creative output that he puts into all of these, that he's technically the writer and the director and the primary animator and everything else that goes with it, has to be exhausting.
I mean, it is. And the fact that, you know, he started this company along with his co-creator, who at this point has passed away, unfortunately. Like, he still has a desire and passion to do it. And the fact that he has kind of birthed out a whole generation of animators that are doing their own work. There's 3 or 4 studios now in Japan that are essentially connected, in at least in a spiritual way, to Studio Ghibli, who are putting out great animation as well, like even in just the last couple of years, because of the connection and the work that they did under Miyazaki. They were kind of like apprentices to him. I think it just shows that it's not just Studio Ghibli that can put out great animation like that. There are so many other people that were influenced by Miyazaki that are doing that kind of same work.
But isn't part of the fact that he can say, "I'm going to retire," part of what's allowing him to continue? When the expectation exists, doesn't it put extra stress and strain on you to accomplish or to fulfill what you want? I mean, by keep saying, "I'm going to retire," he can work at his own pace. He can do it when he wants. And when he says he's gotten to a point where he likes something, he releases it. But there's nothing on him. There's no expectations that he's going to.
I don't know about that. Usually by the time that we know that something's coming, it's within a certain timeline. But whether to expect another film, I don't know.
I think for him, he needs to be inspired. I think the last one before The Boy and the Heron, The Wind Rises, to him that was a personal project of his. And I remember when he said, like, I'm retiring, this is it. It was because for him at that time he thought, you know, this is my personal project. I don't really have anything else left. But then he got the creative juices again to want to create. And I think for him, as long as there is that spark of creativity and wanting to come up with something new, I think there'll always be that kind of next film or next project, and until he just doesn't have the desire to create. And I don't think for him that's going to be the case. I think there's always going to be that next project that he's going to work on, because there's going to be something that inspires him to do another film, another short, another whatever it is.
Yeah. Did you know this is the first film to earn over $200 million in grosses before opening in the United States? I think there have been other films, obviously, in the Chinese market that lately they have their own certain ones that are some of the highest grossing films of all time now. But at the time, this was the first real international film that seemed to make this kind of money. Did you know The Cleansing of the River Spirit is based on a real-life incident in Miyazaki's life in which he participated in the cleaning of a river, removing, among other things, a bicycle? Did you know one of only 2 animated films ever to receive the Japan Academy Prize for Picture of the Year, the first being Princess Mononoke from 1997, a product of the same crew? And finally, Miyazaki refused to go to the United States to accept his Academy Award for this film due to his opposition to the Iraq War.
Okay.
That one's primarily for you there, Dad.
Yeah.
But that looks like a good spot for our first break. We'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 322nd episode, we discuss The Princess Diaries from 2001, celebrating its 25th anniversary, directed by Gary Marshall, written by Gina Wendkos, music by John Debney, editing by Bruce Green, starring Anne Hathaway, Julie Andrews, Hector Elizondo, and Mandy Moore. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. And before we get too much further, let's check in with our guest. Michael, what is going on with you? What are you working on, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so I am the host of the Screen Nerds podcast, a podcast for film lovers, by film lovers. And right now, in the next couple of weeks, there's going to be some quick screen reviews of The Odyssey and Spider-Man Brand New Day, and some rescreen episodes of the 2006 Miami Vice, and another Studio Ghibli film, Only Yesterday, which is getting its 35th anniversary screening for the Ghibli Fest in a couple weeks. So looking forward to seeing that for the first time on the big screen and doing a rescreen episode on it. So pretty busy. Like, the next couple months are going to be, there's a lot of good films that are coming out to check out and review.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I know I'm excited for this weekend that's coming up. I know that this episode will release after The Odyssey, but every time a Chris Nolan film comes out, it's always a big deal. The fact that it's gotten such critic reviews so far, I think it's got a 99% on Rotten Tomatoes as of this afternoon. It's going to be a big deal. And this, how does he top winning the Oscar, winning himself multiple Oscars? I mean, there was that fun story of earlier in the week where he said he had to remove the Oscars from his own room, his office, because he felt they were too distracting during the writing process, only for his son to remind him, well, Dad, don't worry, you didn't win the Oscar for writing.
Leave it to your kids.
I figured that's why I mentioned it. Seems like something I would tell you.
Yeah.
But yes, certainly a very couple interesting months coming up, and summer is just flying by for us, so I don't know how it is for you, but just It feels like we just started and we're already halfway through.
Yeah, that's always the thing. Like you blink and half of the summer's already gone. But it's always good to be focused on what's up ahead, just even in the immediate future, because there's a lot of good stuff even just coming up here shortly.
Well, and awards season is, 6 weeks away?
Yeah.
I think the end of August is usually when it really starts to kick off. We get Venice, and then TIFF is usually the second week of September. So it's hard to think that we're already there again after the grueling last couple of years as they continue to elongate the Oscars season. But, oh well, we suffer on, and I don't think anybody is really all that sympathetic to us as the creators of this show. That being said, we left off at Best Performance. Dad, who did you have down?
Miyazaki.
Yeah, this is a rather obvious one.
I can also go secondary and most charismatic, probably too, but I couldn't do it 3 times, and I wasn't going to do that, so I do have somebody else for secondary and charismatic.
We talk often about best performances and the default award usually going to the director, but I really don't feel bad about that here, given writer, director, head animator, all of these other things, and the fact that, and I had particular difficulty with this week, if we're not doing voiceover acting nominations because of the different versions and such, then it's really hard to nominate any of those. So you really have to go with the production side of things. And so that's where a lot of my problems lie. But I agree with you that I had Miyazaki.
Didn't Miyazaki also do the craft table?
Michael, I would assume that you went 3 for 3 on this.
Yes, I always am. I'm a huge fan of Miyazaki. If there's a Mount Rushmore of directors, for me, he has to be on there because I love all his films. He hits 100, 1,000% for me as far as like his work. No exception here. Like his writing, his animation, his directing, it's a hallmark for this film, and so. Obviously, for me, yeah, it's definitely going to be the primary reason to watch this film, to appreciate this film, to enjoy this film.
As far as best secondary, one of the things that stuck out to me, particularly on this second viewing, was how much I actually liked kind of the change in tones at different places of the musical score and how much it seemed to complement what was going on screen. So I nominated here Joe Hisaishi as my best secondary performance.
Yeah, you can never go wrong with him. He's iconic with his scores. I'll get into a little bit more of that because I have a different secondary, but I do have him as far as my charismatic. But
okay,
definitely a great pick there from you.
For me, I didn't know what else to do because we didn't have the voiceovers, so I saw the Americanized English version, so I picked the 2 performances that I thought were the best among the American voiceovers. The secondary performance of the Witch Sisters, Yubaba and Zeniba, was Suzanne Plachette, which I did not know until afterwards. I looked it up. And most charismatic was Kamaji, the foreman, was David Ogden Stiers.
Mm-hmm. Yep, he's actually done a couple of Miyazaki dubs, but yeah, he was the boiler man, and he was actually my secondary because I kind of prefer the English dub just watching. Although, as someone who loves anime, I do watch the subtitled versions, but for the Ghibli films, I like the English dub because they do such a great work in picking the right people for those parts. But Kamaji, the way that David Ogden Stiers does his performance, it just really makes you appreciate the character even more. And it's just a well-written character, too, because he's kind of the one that kind of shows the grace to to sin, and kind of gets her into everything, and really has her be a part of the group, because if it wasn't for him signing off on it, then she wouldn't have been able to survive. And so the journey that character goes on, from being like this gruff, standoffish character to this loving kind of grandfather character, because he even says at one point that, he says that it's a granddaughter. The fact that he is, he becomes so like open and loving, I really just enjoyed that performance of his.
And so you had Joe Hisaishi for the music for Most Charismatic. Dad, you said that you had David Ogden Stiers for Kamaji as Most Charismatic. I had, I guess not as a voiceover particularly, but just the character of Chihiro. I think that without somebody like that at the center of the film, no matter how it's voiced necessarily, although I'm sure that is somewhat influential, and I've only seen the two US or American versions without the subtitles, I guess. I mean, I always use the subtitles anymore because my hearing is not as clear as it used to be. But that being said, I think that the vulnerability, the fear, the just range of emotions that are displayed by that character are engaging and relatable, because this is such a foreign, abstract world that she's placed into, and the journey that she's going on as our hero in the story is what draws people into it. You have to have that kind of audience avatar character that she has, and so we go through her journey, her eyes seeing this entire world and how it relates to her. And obviously we're still rooting and pulling for her, so I found that the most engaging character.
Yeah, and it's sad or bittersweet after this last rewatch, knowing that the English dub actress who did it was Davita Chase, who recently passed away, and she also did the voice of Lilo. So in that year span, you had her doing this role as well as Lilo, and it's just two iconic characters that she did. And yeah, it's very bittersweet now watching this film. It's kind of like with a couple weeks ago, I was on another podcast and watched Kiki's Delivery Service, and the bittersweet watching that because of Phil Hartman, and it was his last performance. And it's just, these films have that timeless quality to them, but they also have, as time goes by, that kind of bittersweetness to it.
Yeah, I know Dad has a special place for Phil Hartman too.
And his kids both grew up in Eau Claire with, I think it was his wife's sister raised them in obscurity. But my understanding is the son may be at Second City right now.
For everybody who's not from Wisconsin and has no clue of Wisconsin geography, Eau Claire is a city in northwest Wisconsin, about an hour from the Twin Cities and the border of Minnesota. So just for reference sake, it's a top 10 populated city in Wisconsin.
About 75,000, 80,000 people.
Yeah, Green Bay is a little bit larger. Madison and Milwaukee are obviously larger, but outside of that, it's comparable with some of the other major cities that you'd necessarily think of, especially if they're not like suburbs of Madison or Milwaukee. But yeah, you can't just name drop Eau Claire and expect our range of international audience members and people across the country to know without some level of context. But that being said, let's move to best scenes. Then I have 5 nominees here. I have Amusement Park / The Pigs, which I'm not even going to start the scene so much as like when they get out of the car per se, but rather kind of our entry point into the world. When they sit down to start eating and she starts scolding them essentially to stop, up until the point where everything kind of turns and we get our entrance into the spirit world, I'm going to nominate here for that particular scene. Then I skip forward quite a bit and I go to the river spirit, which I think for me, especially the first time through, is where I started to really more invest in the story. Up until that point, I found it a little bit more meandering. I couldn't figure out exactly what was going on, what the characters were. They were all kind of strange. About that point where we had a set scene that had a beginning, middle, of an end, and we had a purpose to it, I felt like this is where I could invest in the story, invest in the primary characters, and figure out what was going on. And I felt that again during my second viewing here. Then I have Rescuing Haku, which is the scene where he's the dragon and we have to take the cursed item out of him. I have No Face, which is when No Face is kind of rebelling or causing all the ruckus inside the bathhouse. And then I have the final test scene, which is on the bridge where she has to identify her parents among the pigs. So I'm sure I missed some things, but did either of you have some additional scenes to nominate for best scene here?
I did not.
I think you kind of hit the main big ones. I think those, if you're going to narrow it down to 5, I think those are probably the 5 most well-known and probably the most important scenes.
All right, so then among these, what is the best scene?
I would go with Rescuing Haku. I think to me that's the one that kind of really establishes the full connection of their relationship, and I think it shows the lengths to which Sen would go to protect and take care of Haku. And yeah, I think to me that's kind of the one I would say is the best scene out of the film.
I agree. I think it's the one that shows that even in the situation where she's growing and becoming more responsible and mature, she's got a higher power that she's connecting to, whether by love or by relationship or whatever, that helps carry her through.
And I'll make it 3 for 3. Even though I love the river spirit scene and I have that nominated for my favorite scene, I think this is the one where it feels like she's separated from all the reliance and the help that she needed up to this point to make this story work. It was her taking that step forward, her trying to, in essence, reclaim her own power, but at the same time rescue somebody who had been rescuing her through most of it. And so there is kind of that rebalancing of the power equation within the film, that she has a lot more agency as a result of that. Favorite scenes, I nominated the river spirit one, but what were everybody else's favorite scene?
For me, it was when Sen visited Zeniba, Granny. It's toward the end of the film, but I feel like that was kind of the moment when you really had everything kind of come together for her. Like, she had gone on this kind of a journey of really finding herself, and it was really kind of when she connects with Granny that it kind of clicks with her, like everything kind of coming together. And there's a particular line, you kind of already mentioned it at the beginning of the film, or beginning of the podcast, that really indelibly stuck with me. But it was in that scene where that line is, and so to me that's kind of my favorite scene of the film.
I do find that endearing, and especially the second time through now, where you can see the difference. I know when the first entrance of Zeniba is, it feels like she's a threat as opposed to a calming influence, but by the end of the film, it felt like the role reversal where it was like a Glinda is, and I hate to keep bringing it back to Wizard of Oz, but it just, to me, has so many parallels where instead of the witch dying early on, you basically have the Wicked Witch of the West in Yubaba as in control most of this, whereas Glinda is Zeniba, and we just don't know it for most of the film, but in the end of her journey, that seems to be the one that takes her to that final place that she needs to go to be able to make her way home, essentially.
For me, my favorite scene is No Face, because I think it exemplifies what loneliness can manifest into. I mean, you can be the magnanimous benefactor handing out gold. You can become the person who's devouring all those around you. There's just so many aspects of it that show what you need or what you feel like you have to do in order to avoid or to eliminate or remove loneliness. And then ultimately his becoming more vulnerable is what allows him to transcend that loneliness.
I would say them, because we don't have a genderized version on that.
Okay.
We don't know whether No Face is a man or woman or something else. Maybe they're non-binary.
Okay. I'm old.
I know. It's okay.
I'm just going by the normal English grammar.
Sure. Most indelible moment for me, though, is the stark reality of that initial injection into the spirit world with the amusement park and the pigs, where her parents engorge themselves and then she's transported into this whole other atmosphere. It's just kind of the shock of being interjected into that so quickly that I find to be imprinted more or less on me.
You know, I already mentioned it kind of already, but in the scene with Sen when she visits Granny and Granny says the line, once you've met someone, you never really forget them. It just takes a while for your memories to return. Especially like the multiple rewatches of the film, that line just kind of sticks with me because it's true. I mean, we sometimes forget about people and situations and events, but when we have those memories kind of come back to us and we're reminded of them, they have that impact kind of come back to us. And so hearing that line and just being reminded of it again and again, it's just, to me, it always just sticks with me.
Mine is rescuing Haku. I mean, that's the part I remember and will remember probably more than anything, because I think it was the most tender moment of the film.
Well, that looks like a good spot for our second break. We will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley Rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our Master Greatest Movies of All Time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com and find us the top entry on the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast show page. That has the grades we've done so far for all 288 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Oh, yes. Barbara Ling, 73, American production designer. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Michael, Batman Forever, an Oscar winner. Don Iwerks, 96, American entertainment executive. Disney and SimX Iwerks. Randolph Mantooth, 80, American actor. Emergency. Loving, The City. Peter Van Norden, 75, American actor. The Naked Gun, 2.5, The Smell of Fear. The Accused, and The Stand. Bonnie Tyler, 75, Welsh singer. Hold Out for Hero. Total Eclipse of the Heart. It's a Heartache. Joanna Pettit, 83, English actress. Casino Royale, that's the original with David Niven. The Night of the Generals and the Evil. Louise Lasser, 87, American actress. Mary Hartman, Bananas and Happiness. Carter DeHaven, 94, American film producer. Hoosiers. Dead Heat on a Merry-Go-Round. The Exorcist 3. And Sir Sam Neill, 78. North Irish-born New Zealand actor. Jurassic Park, The Piano, and Event Horizon.
To start with Sir Sam Neill, the one movie you really didn't put down that I'm kind of surprised, The Hunt for Red October.
True. He had a good relationship with everybody on set, including there was a very nice comment or set of comments about working with him by Alec Baldwin.
Might be one of the few times Alec Baldwin said nice things about anybody. But okay. And I know that you criticize his accent or lack of Russian accent, but then again, Sean Connery trying to do a Russian accent in Hunt for Red October is quite notable as well.
Yeah, I know. Barry Lasser, if you were my age, it was quite the thing, and it was sold in syndication. Mary Hartman was a fake soap opera, comedic soap opera. And my dad would get so mad when I'd put it on and watch it because he thought it was garbage and it was a little too racy. And I'm like, cripesy, Dad, you're the one telling me the off-color jokes all the time. And if you're not familiar with Bonnie Tyler, she had a great raspy voice, and her contributions into We Are the World from 1984 when was the famine relief that was done by the United States. Very phenomenal. Randolph Mantooth was the sex symbol of every teenage girl at one point in time who watched the show Emergency. A couple of big names, couple of names that are, significant. All had some impact. Peter Van Norden, I didn't recognize the name until I looked him up and remember him very much from The Naked Gun.
Now, I'm actually a bit surprised. I know that a lot of people, particularly from my generation, and as they've continued to still do sequels upon sequels, most of them seemingly bad by most recollections. I haven't seen most of them. But of Jurassic Park, the amount of people that seem to have this relationship, I guess I didn't think about or understand with Sam Neill from Jurassic Park was a bigger part of people's lives than I guess I thought of. I mean, I know Jurassic Park was this huge movie, but I guess I just didn't think it was quite that big of a movie for people. But I guess I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's an iconic film for a lot of people, and his performance is like immediately everyone thinks of it. And that's why, like, so many people, when they were sharing condolences online, that was like the first film that came up, because for an entire generation of people, like, that is their Dr. Alan Grant is kind of their iconic character in film.
Obviously, with Steven Spielberg films, there are certain ones that resonate beyond generations. Jaws is like that. I think for a lot of people, E.T. is still like that. And I thought Jurassic Park held a place, but I just, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why in my mind I didn't think that it was quite on the same level as some of those. Like when Harrison Ford goes, the first two words or the first two names of his obituary are Han Solo and Indiana Jones. Like, that's obvious. But I didn't think for some people Dr. Alan Grant was kind of on that cinematic equivalency. And I guess he was. And I guess I didn't realize it.
Well, and I think it perpetuated the fact that they had relationships that went on, and they traveled together. They did shows. They would appear at
Who's they
film
here?
Festivals and such. Well, for instance, about 6 hours before Sam Neill passed, he sent text messages to Spielberg, "Thanks for changing my life," to Jeff Goldblum, "Keep smiling, don't be sad for me," and then Laura Dern for "Continue to be a shining light." Just shows the level. He knows he was dying, and he reaches out to his co-stars from this film.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it. And so we appreciate all of these for their contributions to the arts with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. Okay, let's move to Best Funniest Lines. I only have 3 nominees here. I don't think this is a movie about necessarily the lines, but I will start with the one that I led off the show with. Zeniba, once you've met someone, you never really forget them.
Zeniba, giving Chihiro a hair tie. It will protect you. It's made from the threads your friends wove together.
Chihiro, I finally get a bouquet and it's a goodbye present. That's depressing.
I only have one left. Eugeru, Welcome the rich man. He's hard for you to miss. His butt keeps getting bigger, so there's plenty there to kiss. Do you have any left?
No.
Michael, do you have any others?
No, there was just, we've pretty much covered the ones that I thought of.
All right, so then let's move to the Stanley rubric. First up is legacy. Legacy is a measure of the legacy of the film approximately 5 years after it came out. So 2006 to today, the last 20 years. What is the legacy of this film as shared between two equal yet separate groups, the industry and the audience? 5 and 5 points apiece for a total of 10. Dad, would you like to go first or second here?
I will go second.
I think if I'm going to think about the industry legacy, given how much influence this has had over the last 25 years on the nature of animation, particularly the effect that it had on Pixar, who also, by similarity, has had such a knock-on effect for animation in this generation and storytelling and the rest, making anime more of an accepted art form, even though I still think that, particularly in the Western world, it's not seen as a high art form, or at least an adult art form in the same way that it is in Eastern culture. I would still say that this is likely a 5 for the industry. I think where I'm a little curious, and I may be off on this one, is the audience. In an international audience, I think this is a fairly well-seen film. For those about 45 and younger, I'm going to guess that there's actually quite a large portion of this world that has seen the movie. Given the fact that our world-famous office poll, somebody decided to, well, I think I know the answer to this already, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How many of you have actually seen Spirited Away? And then was absolutely shocked that there was like half the hands in the room that seemed to go up.
Yeah. I mean, the office staff is not somebody I would pick to do a lot of foreign films to begin with.
That's the weird thing about this, though. Because there's a American voiceover version, it's only international animation. It's not necessarily international in dubbed or subtitled or whatever else, but I think that world is still getting smaller as we've seen international favorites like Squid Game become big for American audiences. So from that standpoint, I can't completely neglect the boomers, particularly my dad, from this world, because I don't think that they have seen this, but I think this is a fairly wide-ranging, well-seen, culturally important movie once you hit a certain barrier. And then for the international audience, I think it cuts across generations. If you go to the Eastern world, my guess is that they don't have a large swath of people that by age demographic is removed from seeing this film, because I do think that it's treated differently elsewhere. So I'm going to say this is a 4 on the audience, and I'm going to give this a 9.
I agree on the industry. I had a 5. And actually, I'm a little higher on the public because I figured if half of the office had seen it, there's a large variety of people in the world who have seen this film, and I'll say I'm the outlier. So I'm at a 4.5, so I'm at a 9.5.
I think for me, for the industry, I think it's a 5. I think given the fact, and you read off at the beginning, the list of all the accolades as far as like top 10, top 25, top 100 lists, that it continues to still be on all these decades later, I think it shows that a lot of people in the industry still hold it in high regard. The fact that it did win the Oscar, and it was at the time the first non-English speaking hand-drawn animation film to win the Academy Award for Best Animated Film. It shows that the industry appreciated it immediately, and then even 10, 15, 20 years later. So I think for it, I think it gets a 5. I think for the people as a whole, like the audience, I tend to go 4.5. I give that kind of 0.5 for the group that hasn't seen it, but I think the fact that continually when G Kids, who has the distribution rights now, does their Ghibli fests, they continually put Spirited Away in there every year. And every year, there's a lot of people that go and re-see the film again and again. So it's always out there for people to go see it in the theater. And I'm always a champion of seeing films in the theater. So definitely always recommend, if you can see a Studio Ghibli film or a Miyazaki film, go do it. And the fact that this one is one of the yearly traditions, I think speaks a lot to how the audience still wants to see it. So I think for me as a whole, I'd say 9.5.
Personally, I was just trying to build in a little wiggle room and whatever else, but I don't feel strongly enough to stay at my 4. I'll acquiesce to the crowd, and we'll just make it an even 9.5 across the board. I think that's fair. Let's move then to impact and significance. This is a measure of the impact and significance in the initial 5 years after its release, so roughly 2001 to 2006. What is the impact and significance of this film among the same two groups of people, the industry and the audience? 5 and 5 points apiece for a total of 10. Dad, since I led off the last category, if you'd like to start here.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I get the distinct feeling that this is a film that gained traction within the industry more as time progressed. I don't know if it necessarily had the same level of appreciation. Maybe I'm just wrong on this. So I gave it a slight downturn. I'm at a 4.5 for the industry, but I'm at for the public, because of how much it generated and such, I'm at the same 4.5, so I'm at a 9.
I don't think I agree on the slight downgrade for the industry, only because, again, if you're thinking about it in relation to what it's done for Pixar and Pixar's explosion from roughly about 2001 when Monsters, Inc. comes out to then you have a couple of years later The Incredibles, you have Finding Nemo, you have Cars, and all of these movies that through that decade, Wall-E, Up, Toy Story 3, eventually getting to Inside Out and such, that I think have such a impact from a movie or a storytelling such as this. But the other part of this, and why I would, if it were just that, I think you could make at least an argument that that's somebody else's work being influenced by it. But there's the twofold of taking animation or anime more seriously by it being awarded by Western audiences. Yes, it was only the second year of the Oscars that they were running Best Animated Feature. This is the second winner after Shrek. But even so, we had at least a nominated Oscar-winning film for animation in Beauty and the Beast before. We had other things that were recognized. This was the first one to kind of break into this mold and say, this is a different culture's take on animation, and to take it at least a little bit more seriously as an art form internationally, beyond just Japan or the Eastern culture. And then I want to say that this type of filmmaking, as it relates to an audience, became bigger as a result. So I would stay with the 5 there for a industry point of view, especially given how critically well this movie was reviewed at the time. And the audience, I think, is the better argument for, over time, it has seemingly picked up more and more fans. I think in the moment, reaching the target audience that it was going for, which was a Japanese primarily audience, maybe an Eastern culture audience. But the fact that within 6 months to a year, it gets an American voiceover version that is released to the public, gains enough traction to win awards, and has ever since continued to expand this art form within American culture. I'm going to give that a 4, because I do think that it has had a snowball effect, but in the moment, it's not nearly as big of a movie as some other films that we've discussed. And so I guess in relation, if I were trying to be honest, I would say this is a 9 for
I agree with y'all as far as like with the industry with the significance. The fact that, again, it won the Oscar, it was critically acclaimed right out of the gate. It had the influence of animators, of the film industry as a whole. Even just right out of the gate, I think it shows that it had that kind of impact inside of Hollywood, inside of Western animation studios, not just studios in Japan. So I would have to give that a 5. And then again, like you said, Tom, it kind of took a while to really get the audience, as far as like the Western audience, to really appreciate it. Even though I mentioned earlier the fact that Disney was kind of the impetus for really getting this film out there, I think it still needed to find its way because it still was new to some people. There was a Miyazaki audience by the early to mid 2000s, but it really kind of late 2000s, 2010s that there really was more of that audience. So I kind of have to say with the people it's a 4. So overall I would have to say a 9 too.
All right, so then that's a 9 average between the three of us. Let's move to Novelty. Novelty is a measure of the originality of anything having to do with the film, as well as the execution on that originality. 5 and 5 points apiece for a total of 10. If I were to start this on an originality standpoint, I do think it stands out a little bit from other Miyazaki films that are a little bit more straightforward, have a different, seemingly easier plot line to follow. This feels more, as I put several times earlier in the show, abstract. And so from that standpoint, while I think there are other Miyazakis that I've seen that are somewhat abstract, for example, The Boy and the Heron is frustratingly so to me. I don't know, though, if this is the most creative within his own sphere, yet it feels like he's his own creator. So the only way that you can really bump him for any lack of originality or creation is when you're measuring him against himself. And this comes in, forgive me for possibly my ignorance here, Michael, you'd probably know better than I, the middle of his career, seemingly.
Yeah,
from
I mean,
the amount of films that he's produced, this is like kind of right in the middle.
Yeah, this would be kind of in his middle. Yeah, you would be right on that.
Because he started making them in the mid 80s, if I remember correctly. And this is like film 5, 6, or 7, somewhere in that range. And he's probably made a good handful since this movie as well. So from that standpoint, he's a bit unique among creators and even among anime people. But it's not... It's more about his process and maybe his execution on doing that than it is a creative, that because he's not even really reinventing how he draws the characters between films, or even to a degree some of his storytelling per se, but it's just simply he executes at such a high level that's impressive to other animators. One of the things that I've constantly heard about is how much other animators love watching his films for the visual of all the hand-drawn nature of it and how impressive each of these things are. So I will say I'm gonna give this a 3 on originality, and that may seem a little bit harsh, but I'm gonna give this a 5 for execution because it is the story or the film that I think to most people in an objective manner they feel like is operating at the highest level. So I'm gonna go with an 8 here.
For originality, if you isolate the various parts, there probably isn't a large amount of originality in the individual parts, but the sum as a whole is more original because of how it was uniquely tied together. So I'm going to give it a 3.5 for the originality. I think I'm a little higher than you, Tom. Execution, I'm going to be honest. What I tend to do is I'll watch a film, and especially if it's one that I'm not sure whether I'm going to like, If it starts to drag, it might be me. So I will stop the film and come back to it when I'm feeling differently or having better rested or whatever. And I stopped this film about 40 minutes in. And I must say that when I came back and watched the last, I guess it was about an hour and a half, a little over, or close to 2 hours.
I think it's just a little over 2 hours, if I remember.
Okay, so when I'm watching the last hour and 20 minutes, it went much faster and was much more enjoyable. But that first 40 minutes, to me, it took a lot to get into the film. So I can't give it a perfect 5 for execution for that reason. It just kind of started too slow and meandering and having difficulty following. So I'm at a 4.5. So I am at a 8.
Okay.
For me, like, the originality, like, obviously, like, the story itself is pretty original. There's not really, compared to other Miyazaki films, like, it's unique in that aspect. But there are themes, and I kind of touched on it earlier, having the strong, well-written female protagonist. That's touched on in a lot of his films. Flying, the beautiful animation. There are a lot of things that are very similar, even like spirited characters in My Neighbor Totoro and Princess Mononoke. So it's not necessarily unique in touching on some of those themes. So for me, like, originality, I had to say 4. But for execution, Miyazaki, he always executes well to me, and so I had to give that a 5. So overall, I would say a 9 for that category.
So that's going to be an 8.33 average between the three of us. Let's move to classicness. Classicness is a measurement of how well the movie has aged or not over time. This is now 25 years old, so I would say that it is traditionally eligible for some additional timelessness points, as we have quantified them. But this category, because we felt at one time that it was easier to take points off than it was to add them on, usually because things don't age well over time. Take my co-host, for example. We started a baseline of a 6 instead of a 5, and so this category lives in a lot of nuance, and thus we turn to our graying senior nuance correspondent, Dana.
It's white. That's what I was told I had to put on my passport application. White.
Nobody
For my hair.
cares.
Whatever. Nobody cares. Whatever. Anyway, classic. All right. The problem I had with this, I started out by talking about this. This is set in Japan. Why do all
you
of
made
the
the
characters...
same comment when we did your name. I think it's you.
Maybe.
I don't think these characters are necessarily like that. Yes, they're depicted as white and they don't have the traditional, let's say, genetic characteristics that are associated with East Asian culture. But let's not be hung up on that exactly.
But it does bother me because there's this strong tendency among the Asian countries to want to have white skin, blonde hair, etc.
Is there one single blonde-haired, blue-eyed person in this movie?
No. But that is something that rubs me the wrong. Now, I'm going to give it a lot of points up for the strong female character. I'm going to give strong points up because it talked about things such as needing a spiritual bent in your life, sometimes to overcome things. It talks about loneliness and such. So I'm at a 9 with taking only a half point down for what, gripe and complain as much as you want, but that's the one thing. So I think half a point down on that is not horrible, but that's the one thing. Oh, and by the way, would point out, looking up the street in the city, it looked like a scene from High Noon.
Okay.
Was it an intentional thought that this is kind of
What does this
It's
have to
Gary
do with
Cooper.
classicness?
It's a Gary Cooper against the world. And was that kind of the thought process?
I don't know, but this is a strange place to be bringing it up.
Whatever. So I'm at a 9.
I'm at a 10.
0.5.
I take all of your points, but I have nothing to tag off of this one. I think the universal themes are quite apparent. You have the strong female character at the center of it. It's good lessons for children, but is still relatable themes for adults. I just don't really see anywhere to take off for this, and if you add in the timelessness factor, I'm at a 10.
I'm with you. I think it's at a 10. I think the fact that it has been as beloved as it has for as long as it has, the fact that there is a stage play now that has been produced in London and even made as a film and produced and shown, it shows that people really resonate with this story, and the fact that people continually want to go back and watch it again and again. I think there is that timeliness to it, and so yeah, I have to give it a 10 as well.
So that is a 9.67 average between the three of us. Finally, let's move to rewatchability. This is a measurement of, I guess, your own subjective scoring on how rewatchable you find the film. Traditionally, we start with our guests who seem to have a lot of enthusiasm for the films that they come on for. So, Michael, please, what is your number out of 10?
So I have to, for as much as I love Miyazaki, as much as I love Studio Ghibli, this particular film, I have to give it an 8. And it's nothing against the film. Obviously, I've seen it multiple times, enjoy it, gushed about it on this podcast. But for me, there's several other Miyazaki films that I just am more apt to go back to, whether it's Princess Mononoke or The Wind Rises or even My Neighbor Totoro. Like, those are ones that I will, like, if immediately someone asks me, what should I go watch first? Those are ones that I'll mention, because that's the ones that I usually go back to. But I will regularly watch this one, again, because it's Miyazaki, it's Studio Ghibli. But I have to give it as an 8, just because there's other ones that I would have as a 9 or a 10 for rewatchability.
And I find that fair. I think I'm probably in a similar camp where I've tried to take this category a little bit more objectively to a general audience. So considering my own proclivities a little bit different, there's nothing really difficult per se other than the abstract nature of the plot and some of the fantastical characters that is alienating, I would say. And especially at a younger age where I think children are more ready to accept the fantastical because everything's kind of new to them. When you're in an adult life, it's harder to accept some of these stories because you're much more wedded to a rigid style of life that has kind of beaten you down. I think as my life has gone on, my father's made me more cynical. It's either that or my work or, any number of things. Oh, yeah,
Me.
okay.
Like,
Yes,
it's
you.
my responsibility. Yeah, okay.
You definitely played a hand there, Pop. You have to take some
Yeah.
culpability there.
Go fish.
Okay. Anyway, where it stands for me, I would say that, and I'll credit the point several months ago that Heather Stewart made, or I think for that matter, it was also made by Adam St. John, that the film has to be not about introducing it to people, but whether or not they're willing to come back to it after that. So I'm going to build in a little bit of a buffer because, again, like you, Michael, I think there are Miyazaki films that I have appreciated more. There are ones that I find less challenging, more enjoyable. I respect this film, but it's not a favorite, and so by that logic, I would have to give this a 7.
I am going to give this a 6, and for this reason. I have not a wealth of knowledge of watching Miyazaki films, but this has introduced me, and I'm willing to go back and watch his other films. And I will probably, after I've watched a few, probably think about coming back to this and seeing whether I understand and appreciate it more.
I think that's probably a good way to introduce yourself a little bit further, because I think once I started to watch some of the other ones, I did have a better understanding, appreciation for what the storytelling was. But that's a 7 average between the three of us. Finally, we get to audience score on this one, as we now have to adopt the IMDb score in lieu of the Google score, because that no longer exists. That was an 8.6, and we have a 96% among Rotten Tomato users, giving us a 9.1 average. So to repeat the categories, we had a 9.5 for Legacy, a 9 for Impact and Significance, an 8.33 for Novelty, a 9.67 for Classicness, and a 7 for Rewatchability, with an audience score of 9.1, giving us a final total of 52.6, and currently placing it on the list between The Apartment and The Matrix at number 28 on the list. Not the highest rated animated film. I believe that is still Inside Out at number 20, then Toy Story, and this will be the number 3 animated film on the greater list. But this does place higher than The Wizard of Oz, for what it's worth. So as always, if you have any questions, comments, or otherwise, you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of our socials at gmodepodcast, or on the website ronnieduncanstudios.com/gmodepodcast. Let's go to some remaining questions for Spirited Away. When will Chihiro meet Haku again? They say that they will meet again someday, but any thoughts as to when that may be? Especially with the Rever now gone?
When Chihiro needs to tap into a higher power or a higher spirit based on events or circumstances in her life.
I think whenever she goes to another river or the sea, I think probably at that point.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is an interesting conundrum. If the river no longer exists, where does the spirit go? Is it aimless? Does it... I mean, clearly the spirit still exists. Does it start to inhabit another river? But that wouldn't make sense, because then that river has a different spirit. I don't know. It's a little confounding for me. Number 2. How long were Chihiro and her parents gone? They obviously talk about the fact that there are leaves and brush now surrounding the car. There's at least a few different nights, because we do see Chihiro sleeping on a mat a couple of different occasions. So is this a week? Is it a few days?
I think it's as long as 3 months.
Okay, what evidence do you have for that?
The fact that there's dust all over the inside of the car. It doesn't just happen over a few days.
Yeah, I suppose. What do you think, Mike?
I took it as a couple of days. I think that whatever the progression of time that we see throughout the film, I think that kind of is the basis of which they were gone. So I would say like 3 or 4 days or so.
I would have a hard time thinking it's longer than maybe like 2 weeks. That's why I kind of thought maybe like a week or so would make sense. But I have no real way to disprove that from anything else. So it's just kind of one of these, again, unanswerable questions. Then they're talking about the movers. So depending on how long they were gone, did the movers move everything in? Did they leave? What exactly happened with the new house?
They had keys. They said that.
Yeah.
So they probably moved everything in and left it.
Okay. I think that's maybe an optimistic take, but sure.
That's kind of the take that I took with it, so yeah.
I don't think there's anything about this film that would say that it's necessarily the pessimistic take. It's just you don't have to default to that being the right answer either. Just a thought. And then finally, my last one. Why did Yubaba need to enslave Haku in the first place?
He had more spirituality. He had more power. If she didn't enslave him, she had no ability to control him. It wasn't enough to just have her greed and her ability or her desire to manipulate and try to control things. She had to have that neutralized. So she had to enslave him in order to do that.
I was going to say, I don't think it necessarily is a need to. I think it's just her character is such that she wants to have control over people. And no matter where they are on the pecking order of things, like, she just wants to have control. So I don't think it's necessarily a need to have to do it. I think that's in her DNA to want to do that.
I guess I would tend to agree with Michael a little bit more there, that it makes more sense to me that she didn't need to, because he's not exercising any significant power set that is greater than her magic or her ability per se. However, greed would make a lot of sense to me, because she is seemingly a very greedy character. Any remaining questions for either of you?
The one question I had, and it kind of is just like an overarching question, was, does Chihiro ever reconnect with her best friend from her old town roomie? Like, we see, she gets the bouquet from her. She has the card. The card is what helps her to remember her name, as it was like forgotten, but she has that card and that helps her remember. So does she ever reconnect? Does she ever write back to her? Does she ever follow up with her? That's obviously that's never going to be answered in the film, but that's something I just, especially with this latest rewatch, was something that came to mind. I think she did. I think it, even just to write back to say how things were in the new town, what was going on with her, and everything that was happening in her life. So I would say yeah, but that's one thing that the film doesn't ask or answer in that question.
I wonder, and this is something that I guess growing up in the era that I did, because I was about 10, 11, 12 years old when this movie came out. So I would be probably a contemporary of Chihiro. This is just as the internet was going. It was well before social media had really taken a hold. I think in today's age, it's a lot easier to stay connected, and I put that in air quotes, than it was at the time, where you move further away, you might have some phone connection, but you just don't have the same ability to stay involved or whatever else. What involved means has morphed considerably, because I guess I don't even say that sharing Instagram photos and likes and all of these other things is staying connected. You still have this separation because you're not going through all the same events and the reasons that you were friends in the first place. This proximity and shared experience that you constantly are going through. But especially because the internet is coming to the fore around the time that she's moving, unless this story takes place in an era that isn't like the early 2000s, I think it's possible that they reconnect or that they have some connection in the future. It just may not be right away. All right. Any other remaining questions? Hearing none, I would like to thank our guest for being on with us for his first time. We hope that you enjoyed your first time in the hot seat. I know everybody's got to start somewhere. We do not currently have you on the schedule for the rest of the season, but you're welcome back anytime. We enjoyed having you. If you can remind everybody again, just quickly, what you're working on and where they can find you.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on. It's always, anytime I get a chance to talk shop with fellow film fans, it's always a delight and an honor. So you can find the podcast, the Screen Nerds Podcast, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. And then socials, it's Twitter, it's Screen Nerds Pod, and Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, it's Screen Nerds Podcast. And upcoming, like I said, The Odyssey, Spider-Man Brand New Day, 06 Miami Vice, Only Yesterday, and then there's a plethora more films that are coming out to do episodes on. The quick screen episodes are ones where right out of the theater give my thoughts on the new movies, and then rescreen episodes are sharing thoughts and memories of seeing a film for the first time, as well as my thoughts on this latest rewatch. So they're very accessible episodes to check out and download and listen to. So you're welcome to check them out. And again, thanks for having me on, Tom and Dana. It's been an honor and a privilege.
Well, thank you. Now, I will also remind everybody that all of our guests' different attributes and links are available both on the website or in the show notes as well if you want to check any of his work out there. All right, Dad, remaining thoughts for the week.
Looking forward to the Odyssey. And I did my last episode of Sidebar, my personal project. This last episode was on the fact that there's a lot of wringing and hands and gnashing and teeth of the Discover Warner's merger with Paramount, when the basic premise is when you've got Backrooms and Obsession coming off YouTube and making hundreds of millions of dollars, I don't think there's as much to worry about as we think.
It's who's paying for the production value and where the investment is going to come from, because the traditional studios are still the primary backers or investors in this type of stuff. I understand and I fully appreciate where the current story is going from that standpoint, and I would agree that YouTube creators and such, the avenues by which you have to the means of production are lower than they've ever been with iPhone cameras and the internet and everything else that is available. But what people are still worried about is maybe somewhat outdated thinking. Yes, but it is at least still somewhat relevant until it's not.
Okay, but at the same time, we've got all of these people out there with equity financing who are chomping at the bit for IP type investments to go with the traditional meat and potatoes. I think that you're going to see the bypass of the studios.
Maybe you are. I just don't see private equity, taking on a whole lot of risk. Yes, they'll buy IP once it's established, but before that, I don't know if they're willing to take the risks to make IP.
The lower levels, maybe not the BlackRock or some of those, but the lower level IPs who are looking for it, if you hit big.
Yeah, but it's so few and far between as to know what is or isn't. I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, we are, in my prediction, and I've repeated this over and over and over and over again, that I think that the odd number decades are the ones where we have true film eras, and that the even number decades are transitions between those eras. We're in an even number decade at the moment, and we're right in the heart of that middle of that transition. So as we near closer now to the back half of the decade and getting closer to 2030, I think we will start to see what this next era of film is. That's my prediction, because we're moving out of it wasn't exactly the studio movie, but it was the auteur director and superhero film era. Those seem to be the writer-director type movies, which there are plenty of those guys now, but I think we're moving further away from that, where, yes, you have writer-directors, but the Tarantinos and the Wes Andersons and the Chris Nolans and the Chazelles and the rest of it that are primarily they're writing their own stuff and then they're creating their own stuff. I'm just wondering how much staying power all of that's going to have, or if it's going to start separating out again, where you separate the different types of production, the writing, the cinematography, the direction, the production, etc. If that starts to get separated back out, and we're clearly moving away from superheroes as that becomes a certain level of fatigue. Although it remains to be seen, I think Spider-Man's probably going to be pretty safe here in a couple of weeks. So I don't know. But we have the opportunity to see the Odyssey actually in IMAX on Saturday. So
Yes.
that will be on next episode, I'm sure, us talking about
I will be
that.
doing a review, and then just a tease, my next episode will be some of the war stories that are more humorous. I promised I was going to talk about my years as a defense attorney, so I'm sure a few of my lewd and lascivious cases will be discussed. If you want to have a chuckle, tune in.
All right. Otherwise, I have nothing really to add. Just looking forward to the rest of what's left for the summer before we get to award season, and we'll kind of go from there. But thank you, everybody, for stopping by and listening this week. We'll see you soon. I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner. Next week, for our 322nd episode, we discuss The Princess Diaries from 2001, celebrating its 25th anniversary. Directed by Gary Marshall, written by Gina Wendkos. Music by John Debney, editing by Bruce Green, starring Anne Hathaway, Julie Andrews, Hector Elizondo, and Mandy Moore. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at RonnieDuncanStudios.com or at GreatestAllTimeMoviePodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky, Threads, or TikTok at the handle @GMOPodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our distributor is Captivate FM. Our technical provider is Riverside FM.